today the topic of conversation is all about RevOps at the Helm and how we can steer revenue teams with go-to-market intelligence. And I have a couple of RevOps VPs with me to drop some knowledge on all of us today. So I have Tessa Whittaker, who is the VP of RevOps over at ZoomInfo, and Jamie Miller, who is the VP of RevOps over at Salesloft. And Tessa, I'm going to actually turn it over to you first to add anything to that introduction that you would like. But I also have one question that I'm going to ask. So we do have our RevOps AF conference coming up in May in New Orleans. And we're going to have 300 plus people there, operators from all over the world are coming in, folks from Dublin and Argentina and all over the place. It's going to be great. We've got some offsite experiences like a tour of Mardi Gras World and miniature float building and some really great sessions planned. So I want you to picture that you are the opening keynote speaker for RevOps AF in May, and we call your name. The crowd starts going wild because they're super excited to hear you chat. And you're entering stage left. What would be the walk-up song that you would play as you entered the main stage to deliver the opening keynote for RevOps AF in New Orleans?
Matt, you should have prepped us for this question.
Oh, yeah, I know. Becca and team, don't kill me for a curveball there.
Breaking the rules.
I know.
Kidding. Thanks for the introduction, Matt. I'll quickly go first. As you mentioned, Tessa Whittaker, I lead revenue operations at ZoomInfo. I've been at ZoomInfo for a little over 2 years and just really exciting stuff going on over there. Previously, I was at Salesforce and then Tableau for almost a decade. And so I spent pretty much majority of my career in tech. I'm located in Miami. I love it. It's my favorite place to be. So I get to wake up every day looking at the water when I'm not traveling to one of our offices. So I'm in office about once a month. I'm going to be in Boston, San Francisco, New York, and London in the next couple weeks for our new roadshow. So if anyone's there, hit me up. I love to meet with other RevOps folks. If I'm walking on, it has to be a Taylor Swift song. I don't know which one. I go back and forth. It's like every morning's a different era, Matt.
Yeah.
Probably I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, which it's not as sad as it sounds by the title. If you're a Swiftie, you know it's quite the banger. And I'd have to say that's probably my walk-up song.
The thing I'll mention before I turn it over to Jamie about Taylor Swift is a couple weeks ago, I had some friends from the gym who were talking about where they were going for spring break. And one of them, actually 2 of them were like, oh, we're taking our kids down to Destin, Florida. And I was like, oh, like the Taylor Swift song. And they looked at me, they're like, what are you talking about? And I was astonished that they had no idea that there was a Taylor Swift song called Florida that had the shout out to Destin. So I'll just throw that out there that apparently there are still non-Swifties who, don't know how great that album is.
I know, it's great. They get to listen to it for the first time.
Yeah, for the first time. Could you imagine experiencing that?
I just can't.
Yeah. All right, Jamie, same thing for you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and then what would be your walk-up song?
Yeah. It sounds like they're soon to be converted Swifties
Yeah,
at the So I'm Jamie. I've been in sales ops, RevOps for most of my career. I'm at Salesloft right now. I've been here about 5 years. And before that, I was at a company called Yext. I was with them from when they were a $30 million ARR company through their IPO up through $400 million in ARR. So it was a very exciting ride. I just love the RevOps space and how much it's changed over the past 10, 15 years. It's definitely a very different job almost than when we started. So it's exciting to be here, exciting to be with such a community that everyone's heavily invested in. My walk-up song, I think it's got to be Feeling This by Blink-182. That's what, my husband processed down the aisle when we got married. So I feel like I'm reusing it, but it definitely had some pump up energy that we needed for the reception. I think it would be a good walk up song for a keynote.
That's awesome. Well, I'm a Blink-182 and Taylor Swift fan, so I think both of those are great choices. And with that, the very natural segue into the rest of the work related RevOps topic, if you will. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Reminder on ZoomInfo being a publicly traded company and the safe harbor statement that is here for everybody's review. I did some speaker introductions already, and I'm now going to launch a poll to get everybody's feedback and opinion on what's the biggest barrier to go-to-market alignment, because that is what the discussion is all about today. And I know we have certainly some opinions on maybe blockers that we've seen in our past, and we're definitely going to dive into that. But we're curious to hear the perspective of the attendees that we have and what folks are thinking. So I'll give everyone some more time, just another 30 seconds or so. And I guess as we get into this, Tessa, before I close things out and we show everybody what the results are, if you could answer this question, what would be your answer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was looking at it, and certainly I think 5 is the easy one. But I would say truly, I'd have to say number 1, if you have siloed data and you don't have a source of truth for your data, then it's really hard to make informed decisions and be focusing on the right things at the right time, or even being able to take the right actions. I just think definitely siloed data.
Jamie, what would be your answer?
It was funny when I was going through it, I was like, oh, once I got to process misalignment, I was like, that one kind of encompasses everything. But process misalignment for us right now, I would say, is one of the top barriers right now because it shows up everywhere and it can be a symptom of too many tools or lack of shared KPIs or siloed data. We're certainly seeing all of that as well. But process misalignment is where it ends up hitting the fan and we're, okay, we need to fix this.
And actually, Matt, I read that as what's the biggest barrier to go-to-market organizations, not mine. I was going to say, actually, siloed data can be what I would say that's one of the things that we're always trying to help other RevOps teams solve. I don't think that's the biggest barrier I see in go-to-market organizations. I'd say currently, probably internally, I would say just really the shared KPIs and making sure that they're the same across the board.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say it's good news, but definitely folks are in the right spot because we're going to hit on all of these. And it seems like majority of folks, as you can see in the poll results here, are saying all the above. They're feeling the pain on multiple fronts. So that's some good context for us to dive into a couple of these things. And so, Tessa, I'll actually start with you on this and would love to hear more on how you all have your RevOps team structured at ZoomInfo. What works the best, why it's structured that way? Because ultimately, if you look at revenue operations as the captain of this broader go-to-market ship, structure and alignment and who reports to who, all that stuff matters a whole lot. And so what are some things that you all do at ZoomInfo to make sure that your RevOps team is structured the right way?
So we've gone through a few iterations of the structure of the RevOps organization. In the last 2 years, since I've a little over 2 years that I've had the organization, I've probably reorged 3 times. And I think it's so important as RevOps organizations that we continue to, constantly iterate on our org design based on what are the top business priorities or what makes the most sense from a stakeholder alignment perspective, or how are we essentially going to be able to execute the fastest. And I've learned so much over that time. And I also will preface with, I think based on the maturity of the RevOps organization, you're going to see a lot of different ways that RevOps teams are structured. Being earlier on or smaller stage, you're going to have RevOps folks wear a lot of different hats. They might have 20 or 30 responsibilities. And that certainly was the case, I think, when I walked in, which is I had more RevOps folks that did wear quite a few different hats. One of the things that I intentionally did was put together that structure, which is what are the key pillars of the RevOps org, and having each pillar have its own team with clear roles and responsibilities of the things that they were ultimately responsible for. And so one of the things that I did was really break out the role of business partners and business process. And so I have 4 key pillars today. I have business partners. So think your traditional sales ops business partner, customer or partner, business partner for our partner organization, et cetera, that are focused on the forecasting and pipeline management and really being that operational business partner for those senior leaders. And then I have business process, which is that team that's responsible for taking all of those business processes and gathering the requirements and writing those user stories and working back with the technical teams to automate our business processes into our systems. And then I have a revenue technology team, which is the system admins for our revenue tech stack. And then I have a net new team that I stood up that is all around process innovation, which is AI use cases for innovation, driving ZoomInfo and ZoomInfo. So how are we innovating internally using our own product, and then driving different strategic initiatives? Something very, very intentional about breaking those out and having those clear roles and responsibilities, which I think ultimately just allows us to be laser focused on our top priorities and execute faster. Whereas before, the thing that you see with RevOps folks is if you're trying to do 30 different things every day, then you're probably not doing anything particularly well. So by giving people less responsibilities that they go deeper on, we're seeing more impact, higher quality work, and the ability to execute much faster.
And as the RevOps leader, who do you report up to?
So I report up into our go-to-market COO.
Okay. And Jamie, I'm curious, how does that structure and setup compare to the way that you all structure and set things up at Salesloft to drive alignment across the entire revenue engine?
Yeah, I see a lot of similarities. I think similarly, we've got our systems team that is heavily focused on making sure all of our systems are connected, integrated, running smoothly. And then we have more of what you'd probably consider business operations, core ops, and data insights. And we split those out functionally between a sales ops org, a CX ops org, and a marketing ops org. And that lets us maintain the functional expertise we need, even as the business evolves. I'm sure a lot of people on this call have had a lot of leadership changes over the past 2, 3, 5 years. And so we need to be flexible as some of those leadership changes come to us. And so to ensure that everything's running smoothly, we've actually found the biggest org uplift that we can do is making sure we have the consistent data, the clear language, and the standard definitions across all the teams. And which seems super obvious. And obviously everyone wants to do that. But at the pace we're moving, that everyone's moving, and the new tools that come to market, you can sometimes lose sight of that. One recent example for us, it was our marketing ops team to basically score warm leads for us. The definition they were using to set the parameters for the warm leads was different than what the sales team and the sales ops team uses to tier accounts. And so the sales team basically started ignoring all of those warm leads because they just didn't trust them. They were getting a few that didn't totally overlap with their tier 1 accounts. And so they just threw all of them out. So we were obviously leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. Once marketing realized this, they shifted their definition to the one that the sales ops team was using. And we made sure that we were all operating off of the same definition there. Since then, we've seen a huge uplift in people using the signal as a pipe gen source. And we're seeing a lot of pipe gen from that now. And so that's just one example of how you can maintain those clear standard definitions can actually lead to real results.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have so one thing I'll mention on there, and then a question from the audience, and this will get us into our next topic as well, is I've seen, or the way that I think of revenue operations is, if you think of every company that exists on the face of the planet, they all have revenue. And if you have revenue, you have revenue operations as a responsibility that exists at your company. In the very early stages, as you're just getting going, revenue operations as the responsibility may lie with the founder, may lie with the first salesperson that you have. Because again, if you're early stage and you're growing, most of your growth, if not all of it, is going to come from new logo acquisition and new sales. That all obviously changes as your business grows and evolves and changes as well. So as you ultimately get bigger, you get to this point where now you say, okay, I want revenue operations to exist with a person or one person. And that is typically a generalist, someone who can do a whole lot of things, from systems to analytics, marketing ops stuff, sales ops stuff, CS ops stuff, lots of things. And then as you grow, your team also grows, and you typically start to hire people and maybe even technology with more of a narrow or a niche focus. This kind of gets us into the next part of our discussion on this notion of more tools and more alignment. But there's a couple of questions on the org structure. And I think over the last week or two, I've also seen there was this quote unquote leaked memo from the CEO of Shopify that said, before you start adding headcount and hiring people, you need to show me that you couldn't hire AI to do the job for you. And so Vivian asked the question of how do you get executives to invest in RevOps resources and headcount? Specifically said, Tessa, it sounds like you have a big team. And so I'll start there. How do you interact, engage, build a business case for investing in, I'll say, resources to grow your RevOps org? And then as we get into this myth of more tools and more alignment, how are you now approaching things in terms of how you invest your dollars of people versus technology?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think I can start with how I have historically in the past talked about whether or not we need more resources. And one of the very first things that I did when I came in the organization, and definitely recommend to anyone, whether you've had your RevOps org for a while or you're just starting, depending on where you are in your journey, is just really having a good understanding of what is your team's capacity. And I think with RevOps, especially when you think about some of the more technical things that we do, it becomes easier to measure capacity as you think about, you have X amount of headcount and you have only a certain amount of work that you can essentially put through to sprint and then ultimately release. So if I think about you have X amount of story points that can go through any 2-week sprint, if you're sprinting on a 2-week period, that is the capacity based on stakeholder that you can make changes to any of the processes that are automated to the systems. And so it's very clear, which is this is how much capacity we have to execute every week, 2 weeks, and month and quarter, if you're that far ahead. And here are the current priorities in order that we're working on based on what the business has given us in the conversations that we've had. Here's what's above the line and below the line. If you want us to do more work, then we can certainly have a trade-off where we can take things off the priority list and maybe rearrange that for you. Or if you want us to have a higher output, then based on our current capacity, then we perhaps need to look at adding incremental headcount in order to be able to deliver on that. So I think that's one way, which is simply getting very literal and less qualitative and more quantitative of this is the capacity of the team. This is what we're able to deliver based on that capacity. And if you want to increase that, then, we can potentially look at, does that make sense from a headcount perspective? I'd say that would be bucket number one from pure output. Bucket number two is, do you have the right folks to do the job to be done? Is there a massive transformational project that you have that you're being asked by your executive leadership team? And do you have the right folks on your team in order to be able to deliver that? And so right now we're not, I didn't have open headcount, but I have a massive project that I'm leading from the RevOps organization. And we're doing, I say this smiling, a CPQ, basically rip out and migration to Revenue Cloud, which if anyone's touched CPQ on here, you know how big of a massive transformational project that is. And so I am bringing in someone I'm actively hiring, either, a contractor or a temp employee to come in who is a CPQ process architect. And we needed someone with those expertise to come in and do that job to be done. So I think when there's a big ask from the executive leadership team, when there is a massive transformational project, being open and sharing that you might not have that expertise and you need someone, if not full-time, but for the next 8 months with the possibility to do maybe some sort of contract to hire. I think that's another thing. And then I think the third bucket, when you think about your team is just at capacity, is really going through the exercise of understanding where your team is spending their time. And you probably can find, and I did, for every single individual on the time, an extra 10 hours by just going through an exercise and wiping out meetings. And so if anyone has heard me speak before or we've met one-on-one, you know that I am definitely been on a kick on this for a good 2 quarters now, which is I've pretty much ripped out all of my one-on-ones. I do working calls now with groups for the most part, and completely transformed how I was running my calendar to be much more execution focused and had the team do the same thing. If you think about how many people you have on your team by 10 hours every single week, you probably can find some incremental headcount and just time savings. Looking at just pure calendar and meetings, because there's a ton of capacity that can be found there. And then also challenging the team, go out and find another 4 hours of things that you're doing that you can just use ChatGPT and get done faster. Pretty soon you have 2 full business days that you can give back to your team. And I'm not saying that kind of flippantly or at the highest level. I believe that down to the weeds, that there's probably 2 full days of productivity you can give back to your team through wasted meetings and using GPT to refine user stories or requirements.
Yeah. And it sounds like you've lived through some of that and have that experience to back it up as
Yes,
well.
and launched this week. We'll see how long it lasts. I'm not taking any RevOps meetings on Wednesdays. No internal meetings. If I need to meet with a stakeholder, if I need to meet with our executive team, fine. Wednesdays are for execution.
Yeah. Having a no meeting day, just a focus day, super important. Jamie, same sort of question for you. How does that stack up for you versus what Tessa just mentioned?
Yeah, we definitely deal with similar issues. We're private equity backed, so we definitely feel the efficiency burns a lot. And this is where we like to say internally, like everyone's a salesperson, right? So our salespeople obviously are salespeople, but everyone in some form or capacity is a salesperson. And this is where being forced to sit through some of those enablement sessions on sales process really comes in. So similar to Tessa, I think it is about painting the picture, the art of the possible, sort of, with your ELT, your executives, of what we could be doing as a RevOps team if we are funded to this, right? So if you can tie heads to either initiatives or projects like Tessa is doing, I find that that can be really impactful because your ELT wants to either come together and talk about this or talk to the board about wins that they're doing or big initiatives that are going to transform the company. And so if you can put yourself in that mindset of how am I going to transform the company and what do I need to do that, I think you go a long way of kind of making the case to your ELT. And if they have to go to the board to make the case, you've done their job for them. So if you can put yourself almost in the shoes of a salesperson and talk about it that way and sort of do the job for your executive or your manager so that they don't have to do the work of the selling, it's already laid out for them, that's helped a lot in getting us resources.
I think about the stakeholders that you're, like you said, presenting to, the things that are going to be important for them, and ultimately what'll make them look good and what their requirements are, which also may be different than the things that would make you look good or what your requirements are. Even going back to the big CPQ example project that Tessa mentioned and related, right? The way that people are going to communicate that to, say, a board will be different than the way that Tessa's probably interacting, communicating with her stakeholders in order to get all the approvals and the things that are necessary for that and understand what the migration means, everything there. So yeah, definitely speak the language of the people that you're quote unquote trying to sell to, for sure. And actually, Jamie, on the topic of kind of more tools, equally more alignment, or I guess the lack thereof, as people think about technology and the stacks that they have, you mentioned being private equity backed and obviously efficiency being a big thing. So any examples of tech stack consolidation that you've experienced, and how did you go about making those trade-offs and ultimately that evaluation?
Yeah, we've done it a few times. It's almost like an always on motion for us, I'd say. A big instance of where we did it was we acquired a company at the beginning of last year, Drift. And so we had literally 2 tech stacks. So consolidation was forced upon us. There was some overlap, but oftentimes we were using sort of the 2 best in class solutions and needing to consolidate from there. I mean, it's tricky, right? You're not gonna solve every single business case with one solution. And some of the team is used to using one tool over the other. But when we think about tech consolidation, it's not just about the CFO mindset of cost savings. And the PE-backed mindset of cost savings. That's obviously a big driver of this. But as an ops team, what we're often thinking about is more of what I'll call attention savings. When you think about moving between tools, especially for a sales rep, you want them focused on what they do best for the most amount of time. You want them selling. You don't want them doing more admin or getting caught between tools. Even like if you've ever used 2 keyboards, if you have your laptop keyboard and an external one, and you try and switch between them, you know how both work, but you actually slow yourself down. That also happens when your sales team just has too many tools. And we've looked at it with I think the average sales team has 50 applications that they're using. So you could just think about how much time it takes for reps to get used to the new interface that they're in every time they have to switch. So for us, when we look at tech consolidation, it's like how can we reduce those friction points and those kind of attention breakage points so that we're at least giving the sales team an opportunity to spend more time selling.
Yeah. And Tessa, Jamie mentioned some of those additional cost of tool sprawl. There's the obvious one of dollars you're spending on each particular tool. Every tool you add costs you more dollars, but there's obviously a bunch of hidden costs or maybe non-obvious costs. Jamie hit on some of them, but what are some of those non-hard dollar related costs of tool sprawl? And then how should people think about investing in more tools or products or pieces of technology to help them, especially in today's day and age?
I think if I were to bucket the tool sprawler having just really complex tech stacks and not trying to consolidate some of the costs, one, as Jamie mentioned, is purely just financial. When you consolidate onto tools, you end up saving a lot of money. You have tools that are doing the same thing that if you were just to move some users to the other one, it's a really obvious savings, which is this always on motion and should be an always on motion. I think the second, what Jamie mentioned, which is just purely the time to switch. So you think about from a efficiency standpoint, just moving from tool to tool is going to kill your productivity. So I think that's a really good one, time savings. And then I think the third, which is probably just when you think about change management or something changes in multiple tools versus one tool, enablement, just being a expert in the tool. It's hard to be an expert in the tool if you're using 50 systems and not just, let's say, 3 to 5. And in that same bucket, you have onboarding. So we know how expensive it is to onboard folks into an organization. If you're onboarding them to a smaller subset of tools that they need to use to do their job, then you're also going to be, the onboarding process itself is going to take much longer. I think there's also just when we think about making sure that your different go-to-market teams are working together, alignment is another one. If you have your CSMs and your account managers and all the other maybe sales engineers or whatever the structure of your go-to-market teams look like, all working in different tools to look at the same things, then there are chances that they might not be as aligned as they could be if they were working out of the same platform. I think your second question was really around how we think about evaluating new tools. When I think about our entire revenue tech stack, there's very much here are all the requirements of things that we need to do across all of our different users. Here are the tools we have and where they meet these requirements. And here's maybe some white space of where we don't necessarily have a system, but if we had a system, we could do X, Y, or Z. And so always having a perspective of what is your white space or what other systems could you potentially bring in, whether now or in the future, that might help solve a specific use case or accelerate a specific use case or, help solve a problem is really important perspective to have. And in addition to that, I have all of my different rev tech managers and system admins have a perspective of this is the system we're using now. What are the other top 3 competitors out there? How do they compare to what we have? And where are they from a price point? So that we're always looking and evaluating what we have compared to what's out there to make sure that we have the most modern go-to-market system and tech stack that's out there. Because if you don't do that, you can very quickly have a stale tech stack, especially if the vendors that you're using are not innovating at the same pace that you need them to stay relevant. And then when we think about AI, it's really understanding, are we leveraging all the different AI features that are coming out from the tech stack that we have? And then what's coming out externally that we could potentially leverage? And then internally, we're innovating all the time using our own AI products to say, how can we continue to accelerate our internal use cases or take something that's really manual and automate it to, again, just drive as much productivity and efficiency as possible with the teams.
Yeah. The thing I think that both of you hit on that really resonates for me is around the complexity piece that comes with adopting, or I guess adding new technology. So obviously new technology means like someone's got to use it. If it's, rep facing or, like meant for another member of your team, or maybe it's meant for you or other people. Obviously that produces enablement and complexity issues. But the other thing, and I know I've experienced this firsthand, and this will get us into our next topic as well, is around all these tools that you can set up. They ultimately, you set up all these integrations, things like that. All of a sudden, these new properties kind of get automatically created. Data starts getting created and getting pushed back and forth. And now you could have duplicate properties on records for things. And maybe one team happens to come across them for some report, and then they start referencing that. And then that's different than this other stuff. And so then, right, like you can see how all these things now have happened because of this unintentional consequence of these new tools with these new integrations that create these data points. And I know I've seen that firsthand. Jamie, I saw you nodding your head. It sounds like maybe you have as well.
A little close to home this week. Yeah.
Yeah. So on that note, as it relates to data, and Tessa, you talked a little bit about AI. So I'm curious if the missing link here that we're going to get into now is around kind of AI ready go-to-market intelligence. Let's start with the data side. What does it actually mean to have your data be AI ready? Is it like clean data? Is it quality of the data? Is it the volume or the quantity of the data that you have? Is it none of the above? Is it all of it? Like how should people be thinking of that?
Well, I think the most obvious answer is that the CRM is no longer your source of truth. And so if you go out as a RevOps leader and you're thinking about building out AI, bringing in and building AI agents and all these different AI use cases, and you're building on top of your CRM, not only is CRM data dirty, we all know that, we deal with that every single day, but it doesn't have the total addressable market. It doesn't have your TAM in there. And so we can no longer rely on that CRM as our single source of truth for our data. And so we need to be thinking about what is that virtual data layer that you are going to be leveraging that not only is enriching your CRM data, but also is allowing you to understand your total addressable market and build agents on top of that that are going after that total addressable market. So I think it's really, what is your data strategy on top of your CRM? What is going to be, your virtual data layer, so that you're able to effectively use AI and build AI on the most accurate data possible.
Yeah. And Jamie, I know, with Salesloft, right, big focus, right, revenue orchestration. And so what does it mean to you to have your AI, to be AI ready, to have your data be AI ready as you think about it from a orchestration standpoint?
Yeah. I mean, we've all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out when it comes to data. And now with AI, if you have inaccurate or poor hygiene on your data, you're kind of hard coding workflows and processes now into your system that you might not even realize. And they're really hard to undo now with AI. So I think back like early in my career, I had this CRO that if we had some data point that was inaccurate, he would say, "Why are you lying to me?" It was like kind of a joke, but kind of not, because he was about to go to the board and tell them something that he was just going to take at face value if he hadn't caught this lie. And so I think about that with AI, where it's like, okay, pretend that I was the AI and I was just taking this data point. Like, I'm not a human. I don't know if that's real. I don't know how to make a judgment on whether that's accurate or not. You're taking out that human judgment piece. And the AI is just going to kind of go forward with it, right? If your data is not as accurate as possible, the way you use AI is going to start to be really funky, and you're going to get results that you wouldn't anticipate because just the data is not right. And what's worse is you don't have that human element in there now to make that judgment until way later in the process. When I think about how data readiness for AI impacts orchestration, it's key. If you don't have that, you might as well not go forward with some of these things, because the orchestration tools and the signals are going to be telling you one thing. If it's not based on clean data, it's probably going to be telling you the wrong thing.
How can people maybe evaluate or think about the quality, the If we think about AI readiness on maybe a maturity curve, how can people evaluate the data that they have at their companies today and kind of see where they are on maybe this maturity curve of AI readiness, being like not at all to somewhere in the middle to super prepared?
Yeah. So the first I would think of is fill rate is what I have in mind is like how complete is your data set? That's the first and foremost, right? Because you don't want to be creating processes on data where you just don't have a complete data set. It doesn't have to be complete. There's a scale that you'll make a judgment on, but you want to have a pretty sturdy whole data set to start building some of these processes on. So that would be, I would say, like the first thing. The second thing, though, is then like the data quality. And that's a lot harder to get to without having some processes or some iterations under your belt. You'll get to a more refined view on your data quality as your reps are going to market and they're giving you feedback, or as you see results come through in either pipe generation, win rate, all of those results we're looking at anyway. You'll start to get a sense of what the data quality is. And then I would say maybe even like the third one for us is what our reps are gravitating to, right? So you've got like your data completeness, your data quality, and then there's the want, like this kind of more intangible, which is what are the reps actually excited about and interested in looking at? And that's how we make a lot of our adjustments where our reps will say like, hey, I've started using this data point and it's really helped me. So like actually expanding what you're looking at, I would say is maybe a third pillar of what you want to consider when you talk about the quality of your data. Are you looking at all of the data you can be? Is it satisfying what your end user, your rep is looking for?
Can I add one thing to that, Matt?
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I think you're spot on. I think that the advice I would give to a RevOps professional right now is if you're not using something to capture your conversational intelligence, that's something that I would immediately try to solve for. We use Chorus, a ZoomInfo product, to capture all these customer conversations. And a lot of the different AI use cases that I'm looking at now and trying to pull in to make smarter decisions or drive more actions internally is really pairing that first party conversational intelligence with that third party data. And so when you think about AI use cases, I know I had a friend text me the other day that said, my CRO asked me for our top 10 AI use cases that we're going to go after in Q2. A lot of those are anchored in that conversational intelligence being paired with that third party data. So making sure at minimum, like low hanging fruit, that you have that set up, which I think is obvious, but we're all in different stages of our maturity. I would say that would probably be one of the first things that I would make sure to do.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And I think the other big call out there is like, can't take anything for granted. The low hanging fruit you mentioned, there's plenty of opportunity for people out there that either aren't doing that at all or aren't doing it to the extent that you can. And yeah, the conversational intelligence piece is a great first place to get started. And I guess, Tessa, you were bringing up some specific examples around like conversational intelligence, things that we can do there. So I want to get into a couple of examples of signals and how you all think through these things as it relates to the next best steps that folks can take, basically how to go from data and insights to actions and outcomes. And so the three things we're going to review are around your champion moving on to a new company, having a new C-level person, CRO, CEO, someone like that, who's joined your account, or no decision maker, meaning a decision maker has not been engaged with in the last 60 days of the sales cycle. And Tessa, I'll actually turn it over to you to start talking us through how you think about the action and kind of orchestration piece based on what these signals tell you.
Or when we think about making sure that our sellers are spending their time and prioritizing their time effectively, we want to make sure that they are reaching out to the right accounts at the right time, both from a relationship management perspective, from a prospecting perspective, from a opportunity management perspective. And so having signals that really tell them this is the right time to reach out and why, and this is what you should be talking about, is one of the most important things that we can do for our sellers when we think of guiding them with the data to the right action. So champion moves is a good example. If, let's say, I'm an account manager and I have a big opportunity that's sitting in Q2, maybe it's even sitting at the end of April or the beginning of May, and my champion who has been guiding my deal along this entire time is no longer at the company. They might have brought someone new in who isn't as big of a fan of your product, or maybe they don't have the right buy-in or the budget in place that your champion was helping with before. Or they might just say, you know what, this person is no longer here. This is one of their initiatives. This might not be a priority anymore. And so if I'm an account manager and I have an open opportunity, it's really important that I take action right away to secure a new champion in that account, especially if I have an open opportunity to progress that and close. I think one, from that angle, my champion has moved. I need to make sure that I have someone new. And then another angle of that is my champion has moved to another company, whether I own that account or not. It's an opportunity for us to reach out as a company to see if we can perhaps get a new opportunity created or a new deal in motion at that new account. And so there's kind of two big compelling reasons if your champion moves. One, to save, let's say if there's an opportunity in flight to save that deal, but two, is there a new opportunity that we don't even know about? For C-level joining, I think this is a good example. If maybe you have a prospect account and you haven't had much success before with your product and a new C-level executive has joined, it's an opportunity to go in again and start new conversations and pitch why your product makes the most sense for their top priorities and what they're trying to do. Also, when a new C-level comes in, we all know they are trying to make a quick and fast impact. And is there something that you can provide to them from a product perspective that can help them do that? And then finally, with no decision maker, I think one, it's a reason that the seller can reach out, a compelling reason for them to, go in and figure out, okay, I need to find a decision maker, or I, as a sales leader, can help coach that seller into, you need to find a decision maker. Or in forecast, and you're sitting in your forecast calls, that's something that you're coaching that seller to, you need to find a decision maker because there's now risk in this deal that we need to find someone and identify someone and get them engaged in this deal. So I think really when you think about signals and why they're so important is that this timely event that either signals risk or opportunity or compelling reason to reach out with context and things to talk about when you reach out that make it a huge opportunity for the sellers to drive more impact.
Yeah, I love that. I like what you said, Tessa, on the champion move, because I think, at least for me and probably for a lot of people out there, our initial reaction to seeing something like, oh, your champion has moved to a new company is thinking about how you can now sell into a new company or account. And that is very, very true. But don't forget about the risk that is now attached to the account where your champion just left. And I would argue if you can only do one of those things at a time, ideally you want to do them both, right? But if you can only do one of those things at a time, you should, one, make sure that your current account and your current customer is safe, healthy, right? That you retain them, that you hang on to them, and then sell into that new customer. So don't forget about both sides of the coin there. And Jamie, I'll turn it over to you to ask you the same sort of question. How do you think about orchestrating, again, actions and outcomes based on what these signals might be telling you?
So not to plug our product too much, but we do partner with a few other vendors that do these things really well. And we ingest those into our platform so that our reps can see exactly when these signals are coming in on their accounts and then prep either like a cadence or some pre-templated action. So it's really nice to get these signals and then have the workflow. But the way we're doing it for these categories is for the champion move. That is probably by far and away our most successful signal when we look at our closed won data. So they either have the highest win rates, we're just getting the most bookings from this signal. Because if you have a champion and they're going somewhere else, we just have a high likelihood of that closing. But I totally get what you're saying around you open yourself up to risk. A lot of times it's two different reps for us, right? Like they might go from one account owned by one rep and then they move to a different account owned by a different rep. So it's actually you have to notify two people about this. But it does remind me of what we're using for the C-level signal here. So that's always a red flag for us. If we have a deal cycle open and either a champion leaves or a C-level joins, or we have a renewal coming up, both of those things are big red flags. The deal has changed substantially. So what we're doing in these situations is heavily monitoring a signal we get from G2 which allows us to see if our prospects or customers are searching competitors. Oftentimes, a new C-level comes in, they want to leave their stamp on the company, to show something that they're bringing to the table, and they're looking to either switch vendors or make a big splash. And so that's why it's such a red flag for us. And so we want to make sure we're ready to go in the sales process so that we can speak to some of our competitors or be prepared for what's to come there. And then on the no decision maker, that's a little tricky for us. I'll be honest. We see this happen often, right? Like we're not seeing move in 60 days, deals are pushing. We don't have a ton of great signals that let us know this, right? What we've been telling our reps to do is become more multi-threaded in these situations. If something's taking longer than 60 days, that's going to be a complex deal cycle and you're not multi-threaded enough. So how can you go out there and just find more people to talk to, go to different departments, do a little bit more of like a grassroots movement potentially with end users to try and get more attention and more buy-in at the ground level? From a signal perspective, that's a tough one for us.
So Matt, and all jokes aside, and I realize I went through these signals just sharing how I think about them, but these are all built into the ZoomInfo Copilot. But in the ZoomInfo Copilot, this is all where you have your target account list and you see those signals that are surfaced every single day on your homepage.
That's awesome. I think the thing I love about what you both mentioned is the focus on the actions you want to take to get to the outcomes that you ultimately want to drive. And on the no decision maker piece, even one thing I'll mention that we do at RevOps Co-op at a much smaller scale. Eliza, the salesperson on our team, a lot of times if she's faced with kind of deals getting stalled, she will kind of look at, hey, who am I connected with on LinkedIn, or ping me and be like, hey, do you know the CEO or whoever at this company? Can you shoot them an email to basically just keep things moving along? So stuff like that, having your sales team do as well can be super valuable and help drive a lot of those things forward. So yeah, action oriented, driving those results. And Tessa, I'll actually start with you on this. I know we've got about 2-3 minutes left. And so want to end with just talking a little bit about how you think about go-to-market intelligence and what it means to you. I know you obviously hit on the things that you all are doing at ZoomInfo, but we have ZoomInfo, we have Salesloft, two leading products, very relevant to folks in revenue operations. And so I'd love to know, we talked a lot about AI strategy, tech stack consolidation, eliminating complexity. How do you wrap all of that up and think about that at ZoomInfo as a category leading product for revenue operators and as a revenue operator yourself?
Sure. I think the definition of go-to-market intelligence for me is really just turning the data into action. So you're taking your third-party data, you're taking your AI insights, you're taking your signals, and you're basically automating that for your revenue executors or your sellers or your CSMs to go out and take action. And so whether it's focusing on the right accounts or, powering your go-to-market plays that you're sending out to your prospects or your customers, or building out workflows that you're automating into your systems as the RevOps teams, it's all about taking that data and making sure that you're driving the right actions. And that's what I think about the go-to-market, what go-to-market intelligence is. And then separately from a ZoomInfo lens, how we think about ourselves as that go-to-market intelligence platform.
Yeah. What about you, Jamie? What does it mean to you at Salesloft? Again, another category leading solution, revenue orchestration platform for revenue operators or revenue operations leader yourself.
Yeah, I kind of think of an orchestra, right? So your go-to-market intelligence and the data provided there are your musicians, right? Like you want to find the best violinist, the best cellist, the best bassist for your orchestra. But unless you have someone or something orchestrating everything and making sure we're all playing from the same sheet music, starting at the same time, you're not going to get music. And so the way we think about our tool is more of that kind of layer that makes sure everything's working together in concert and harmony. Again, I apologize for the puns there, but that's the way we think of it. But you need both, right? You need the best violinist, but you also need someone to tell that violinist when to start and what to play.
Yeah. Never apologize for puns. We start every email at RevOps Co-op with a pun or a corny joke. So embrace that energy. I love it. Well, I want to say thank you both for dropping a whole lot of knowledge on us all today. We've started with Blink 182 and Taylor Swift, and we went all the way through very naturally to go-to-market intelligence. So Jamie, Tessa, thank you very much. To all the attendees out there, thank you for joining as well. And I will see you all at the next one.